Right.
Good.
Right. Welcome everyone. We should be live again. And today we are joined by Dr. Darcy Ogada from the Peregrine Fund. So you're the first person, Darcy, that we've had on from the Peregrine Fund. So I'm very excited about this because I follow the Peregrine Fund, and I know a lot of other people do. And you're based in Kenya as Assistant Program Director for African projects. Is that right? Or
Yeah,
program?
that's correct. Yes.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks.
it. The gist of it is, well, I just told you off screen, is basically, yeah, it's just a window of you explaining to people what you get up to in Africa, and then I'll fire questions in. So yeah, tell us a little bit about you. You've been at the Peregrine Fund for quite a while, is that right? How long have you been working with
Yeah,
Peregrine?
about 10 years now. Yep.
Cool.
Been great.
Okay.
Kind of worked my way in and still here.
Tell us about the start then. How did you get it? Because I always, one of the things I love doing with Raptor Aid is just to get the ball rolling is I get a lot of people asking me, and I'll probably ask you this towards the end. I ask a lot of people I get a lot of people asking me about getting into raptor conservation and how they do it, and whether it's an academic or just a member of the general public. So yeah, tell us a bit about your start, sort of leading into Peregrine Fund and raptors and that side of things.
Okay, sure. Actually, I was always amazed at the Peregrine Fund too. I remember when I was in the U.S., I'm American, and well, I'm actually dual citizen now. I've been in Kenya for 20 years. But when I first started working on birds of prey, I was in the U.S. and I was working on bald eagles on the Hudson River, and it was actually it was 1997 when my boss, whose name was Pete Nye, I shouldn't say wasn't his name, he's still alive, but he's retired. And we were I was actually just hired as like a summer person to check on bald eagle nesting on the Hudson River. And it turned out I was really lucky in that first year of the project, because it turned out that the eagle nest that I was watching, there was 2 pairs, and one of them had chicks, and it was the first bald eagle nest on the Hudson River in over 100 years. And that was mostly because of the issues with DDT in the US.
Yeah.
So yeah, when they were first, like, I mean, the bald eagles had come back in the US already in some states, but in New York, it was sort of later. And well, in the Northeast in general, it was pretty late when they came back. And so yeah, 1990, it was 97. And that's when the first nest was. So that was, that was sort of a great way to kick off any career with raptors, because it was a pretty historic moment. And so I ended up from there actually doing some more projects with other researchers on bald eagles and the Hudson River. And then I remember, because I was working for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I remember going into the office very occasionally and seeing the Peregrine Fund catalog, because they used to put out their annual catalog, and I used to flip through it, and I used to think, wow, these guys are doing such amazing projects all over the world. And now, all these years later, to actually be working for them is pretty, it's fantastic. And it was, I can't say it's never easy getting into some of these organizations, working in conservation, because it's sort of, it's a network, and you have to kind of there are jobs that are advertised, of course, but usually those are the sort of entry level, maybe they're paid, maybe they're not. But those are always the ways to get in the door, and those are really important. And it's always good never to burn your bridges, because you do find it's a pretty small world out there, even globally, for raptors. We all kind of, know each other, or eventually know each other. So so I ended up coming to Kenya in 2000 to do a master's. I was supposed to be here for a year, and I was working for a US researcher who was doing a project on mice. And so I was supposed to be doing a whole bunch of, mouse trapping and things like that. And then I got back into birds because it was a really bad year. In 2000, it was drought, and so there were very few mice. And
Yeah.
so I ended up, as part of my work here, it was actually, I was going to do a master's degree as part of it. So I was working for her on her mouse project while I was doing, it was supposed to be a separate project but related with mice at the same time for a year. And because it was really dry, I ended up doing my project on birds, which was more of my interest anyway. So I did a little bit with mice, then I did more with birds. And then, yeah, I did my mouse and bird project. And then it turned out in the meantime that I met my future husband he's Kenyan, and I met him at the research center. And so 1 year of doing a project turned into 3 at the research center, which was at Impala Research Center in central Kenya, which is a fantastic place. So it's, everybody wants to stay. So so 3 years on, and then by the end, somewhere in the end, towards the end of that, we had gotten married. So, one thing just, life just takes over, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So I ended up, kind of, I finished my master's, and I was, by this point, we had moved from the bush into Nairobi because neither of us had jobs really. And then, 1 year of Nairobi was just too much. Ended up moving where I still live now, which is an hour outside. And then I was trying to figure out, how do I get back to what I wanted to do? And so I came up with a project on owls. They were always always a love, and anybody who enjoys raptors, I mean, you have to love an owl, right?
Yeah.
So I ended up kind of making up my project and getting an advisor down in South Africa at Rhodes University. And so I ended up, I just wanted to actually do the project. It was a project looking at Mackinder's eagle owl, which is a subspecies of the Cape eagle owl.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a very strange distribution in Africa. And so it's not really common in many places. And so there was very little work done on it in most places, apart from a few places in Southern Africa. So I just decided I would look at its ecology, and we looked at some nesting places, because it turned out this owl was actually nesting in very densely populated areas around the base. It's a highland species, so it was around the bases of Aberdares and Mount Kenya regions at high elevations, but right in the middle of farms, but nesting mostly on cliffs because of the human traffic. So I ended up doing a project on eagle owls for, gosh, I did it for almost 40 years because, I didn't, it was what I had to do. And then actually, the only reason I stopped was because I had my son at the end of that. But basically, I did that. And then from there, we just started getting really into, actually from the owl work is how I got into all of the work I do on poisoning. Because I think, I do a lot of work with vultures now, but the vulture work all started because I got interested in this whole issue of wildlife poisoning. And that was because of the owl work, because we used to go out and find they weren't freshly dead, but they were old carcasses, bones mostly, and some feathers of dead owls. And the guy that I worked with, whose name is Paul Marithi, he he would recite these stories to me where he knew people were persecuting owls for taboo reasons, and mostly. And so we were just having this conversation. We would go out in the field, we'd walk around, and we would see actually people putting out what are basically pesticides, insecticides, on what they would do is, in this instance, they were cutting tomatoes and in half, and they were still on the vine, and they would put this poison. It was purplish. It's actually furidan or carbofuran.
Mm-hmm.
And they would put it on the lace the sort of half of a tomato with it, so you could actually see it. I have photos of it.
Yeah.
And they were using that as sort of rat control. But of course, anything, and even kids, we would have stories of farmers telling us, kids get sick, and it's just that's the problem with any kind of pesticide or herbicides, is that anything can come, and and of course we know with raptors how tragic the usual circumstances are, particularly with species like owls and rodenticides. So it was more like a homegrown rodenticide, treatment. It's just that's how they would do it for mice, and then the owls would come in, or sometimes they would intentionally try and kill, particularly baby owls. So it was all that was where my real first exposure to all the wildlife poisoning came.
Okay.
But yeah, but then because I had been when I was at the research center for the first few years, I was part of the work I was doing was actually looking at predators of mice as part of my advisor's project. And so we had been doing those 3 years. We had been doing predator surveys. So we were monitoring raptor populations just by walking around counting birds of prey once a month, but for 3 years. So we had quite a bit of data. And so after I started looking at this, what was happening to owls, and then there was kind of at the same time, there were reports coming from mostly northern Kenya about a lot of poisoning of predators, mostly lions, some hyenas also, but of course with every poisoning there was always birds, um, tawny eagles, and vultures. Of course, most people couldn't tell you which species, but there was always birds. And the predators were targeted because they were feeding on people's livestock.
Yeah.
But of course, the residual damage to the non-target species was always way more than the actual predators. So we started. I see there's a light little glowing haze over my head. So we started. So I actually from that sort of those interactions and getting these emails about these poisonings, I started to go back and look at the data that we had collected in the early 2000s to do with the mouse project. And I got my advisor interested, and we actually wrote a paper about it because it turned out that over those 3 years, there was actually quite a significant decline that we could pick up in just 3 years, which is a really short period of time. And so we were able to publish that, and that just showed how much vultures are sort of disappearing from northern Kenya at least. And so that kind of speared me into the whole what turned into this sort of most of my career, which has been predominantly now focused on vultures and wildlife poisoning. And so yeah, that's kind of how I got here. And
so what did you you obviously you're a doctor as well, so what was your which project, what was your PhD in? Was that on vultures or on the owl work? Or
that was the owl work. Yeah, I never actually had any intention of doing a PhD. I always thought, well, I just want to be in the field. And it is true, because the more education you do, the longer you're going to sit behind a computer. That's just the way it is. But my husband said, if you're going to do the work, might as well just do it anyway. And I thought, well, okay, it's not something to regret. It's just, nothing I had ever planned to do, but just the way life is. So yeah, that was on the owls. And I actually did I did a postdoc actually back at the same research center where I started in late 2000 and then, 2009, and then mostly 2010. And that was very interesting because, it was actually a life issue that pushed me into that, because my husband moved on, and I was with a 1-year-old, and I was desperate for what I was going to do and keep myself going, right? And everything just sort of flashed before my eyes, and I didn't have a job at the time, so I was like, oh gosh, I gotta do something, right? And
Yeah,
so somebody sent me a link about this, Smithsonian does these postdocs, and the Impala Research Center is actually a Smithsonian. It's an affiliated research center,
yeah,
so you could actually do the postdoc at Impala Research Center, and I was like, oh, here's an opportunity, but I had no idea what to do, and I had about 2 weeks to come up with a project, and
yeah,
it was a significant sort of amount of funding to just live on, just a small salary, which it would have been pretty small in the U.S., but in Kenya, it was fairly significant. So I was so desperate to just try and get something in some money in my pocket and keep going. So I just got in touch with some friends, and I knew I had some ideas, but it's amazing how, life circumstances, just propel you in a direction that
yeah, yeah. And I think it's really, in a way, it's nice to hear. I think it's really nice to hear for people that might be tuning in that are in similar situations, or like I say, academics or people that want to take that step into doing this sort of thing, or they don't know how to go about it. I think it's really, it's nice to hear from someone who's further down the line and with big experience in this field to how you got started. It's interesting. I want to ask you about, I'm going to stick with the owls, because you're right,
Mm,
people do love owls, and there was a question, maybe I'm being a bit biased because it's my thing that I'm hosting it. So there was a question I really wanted to talk to you about owls, which was the National Geographic article that was done on the owl eggs being used for witchcraft. But maybe before we talk about that, I'd be
mm.
on Tuesday we had Professor Alexandra Rulin on, who's based in Switzerland, and he does a huge amount of work on barn owls.
Yeah,
Um,
I know him actually.
he,
Mhm.
and it was brilliant. And we were talking about that, barn owls and working with farmers, with Palestinians and Israelis. Um, and I just was thinking, when you were talking about obviously the sort of the taboo and all the sort of cultural background of owls in Kenya, for instance, have you managed to win many people over to see that owls are actually more benefit for, say, killing rodents and protecting crops, or is it still quite, with a lot of people, it's still this view that owls have got a bad name, an ill omen sort of effect?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, I still, despite all my work with vultures, I still work with Palmarithi, and I still try and keep my foot in with owls. Although the circumstances now have changed and they continually change, it's really hard to know and to be able to answer that question, because as we were wrapping up a lot of that, most of my owl work, which was around 2008, um, in that time, there was, when I started, which was in 2004, there was one story that Paul told me about somebody coming, um, who was who was based. They were sort of a wealthy family that was based in Nairobi, and they were, I don't know if they were, I think they were Kenyan, but I can't remember. They were African anyway, and they came with a witch doctor from Tanzania. And they came to the study site and they asked Paul, they wanted to buy owl eggs. And because most of the stories behind owl eggs are that, people believe that they can be used to cure some kind of diseases, and like things like AIDS, HIV, AIDS, cancer. I think this particular person was actually, the daughter had cancer. I can't remember which kind, but it didn't matter. So there was these beliefs around owl eggs. I've really tried to investigate, and I've talked to other people here, and we struggle to find a real, like, long-term cultural link to to this belief in particular. Whether it's been there for 100 years, or if it's more something more recent. And we kind of get the feeling it's something a little more recent.
Okay.
But it's, I'm not a cultural anthropologist, so I guess there's better people to answer that. But, from our situation, what we've seen is that, it's been there at a little, like a trickle, for many years. But by around 2008, 2009, it was becoming a lot more than a trickle. It was like, so the guy, Paul Marithi, who I'm talking about, I actually met him because he was interviewed in the local newspaper, a story about owls and how like this local guy is just, he's making a little bit of a living off showing tourists, like bird tourists, come through his area because they want to see this McKinder's eagle owl because it's not very, very common. And so
Yeah.
and he was luckily he was based in an area on this sort of the tourist route where they kind of pass through. So he was doing this kind of tourism related project, but he was also very good with educating local people about owls. And he would increasingly over the years, he's had a lot more like Kenyans and school groups, just local people come and learn more about owls. But I can say it's still in its infancy, and the problem has become that, and the reason I say I can't say really how much, there is still a lot of negative, like taboo feelings about owls, because the situation here, and it's mirrored in a lot of countries, not just even in Africa, but
Yeah.
a lot of the developing world, as people know, there's, owls are a bad omen. Like here, if an owl lands on your house, someone inside's gonna die. Hearing an owl hoot, people would go out and, the minimal they'll do is scare it away, but they could do even worse. So those were always the taboos, and they're still there. There's a lot of owl superstition taboos, and a lot of people say, it's a lot of times it's with anything that's kind of weird, right? Because owls are nocturnal, they turn their heads around, 180 degrees, so they're weird, right?
Yeah.
So anything like that has a lot of taboos. And so there's always there's still this very strong taboo, but what's come in is the fact that with the trade in owl eggs. So I was saying that there's been this huge increase since around 2008 of this basically commercialization of owl eggs. And I can say there's a lot of it that stemmed from Tanzania. They also have a lot more sort of spiritual healers, witch doctor kind of, beliefs.
Yeah.
That is really a core in our areas, Tanzania. So we've always suspected that a lot of the eggs are going into Tanzania, and we have some evidence for that. I mean, we've had people come in from with Tanzania number plates and all that, trying to buy eggs from the site where I was working. So while this trade in owl eggs has grown substantially, I mean now it is just unbelievable. There's not a place in Kenya that you'll go that you won't, if you are looking for owls, especially even if you're a local person, I say, especially someone me who's white, I always stick out. But even if you're a local person and somebody finds out you're looking for owls, the, it'll be almost instant, or somebody will call you after you have left that area. I have eggs. Do you want to buy them, or where can I sell them? I mean, that's why I don't go out in the field anymore, and I really don't want any students studying owls, because everybody wants to sell you owl eggs or
Yeah.
owls, or know how to link to the market. There's been a huge commercialization in owl eggs, and we don't really know the whole source of that. Apart from Tanzania, we've also heard other stories about them going to Arab countries. I don't know how true that is, but all I can say is so that there's a huge issue of the trade in owl eggs. And so what you find now is you don't know what people believe. So it's either they believe the taboos, which is still probably the majority of them, But then you get these people who have heard about, all the trade. And so then you don't know, okay, do they really fear owls or do they actually want owls because
Yeah.
they want to sell
Right.
them or their eggs or whatever. So it's a very murky world right now.
Yeah, and as you say, I remember reading that in the article that you'd stop. Well, it was you didn't want to continue monitoring the owls for fear of obviously leading people to them or encouraging people to go out and collect eggs and yeah, to sell them. It really interests me. Yeah, one of my big fascinations with birds of prey is the sort of cultural aspect and the human relationship with owls. So I'd never heard of that. So it was really interesting to read the National Geographic article. But it's such a shame that yeah, more work can't potentially be done into it, in the respect that yeah, you're potentially going to put the owls at risk with it.
Yeah, it's education is hugely needed, and I think that's obviously a way to go. It's just that, education is a long-term
Yeah,
process, and this is a real immediate need. So of course we look at all angles, and we have obviously been working a bit with Kenya Wildlife Service to try and stem some of this, particularly when you get someone calling you asking for Alex or emailing you, which still happens. I mean, it was happening to Paul like every week, if not multiple times a week. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't talked to him in a little bit about how often it is now, but I've been getting emails, not every month, but every couple of months.
yeah,
So it is a huge demand still. And so we do try and work with the security department of Kenya Wildlife Service. But it's hard to know exactly what they do because obviously there's secrets, that they don't want to tell you and how they operate and everything. So
yeah, of course.
I've I've been talking to some people, NGOs that work with um, poaching and trade in animals and stuff. So it's just been it's sort of actually we're talking about it again recently because there's some other people who are interested in issues to deal with cranes. So we're talking about having a local group that might try and focus with the Kenya Wildlife Service on bird-related trade. So it's I can say there's not a lot happening right now, but hopefully I know there's still enough people that are interested, and there's no
Yeah,
end of it.
yeah, and they're aware of it as well, like you say. So there's people out there that are involved in that field of yeah, working on wildlife trade, and so yeah, if they're aware of it, then yeah, it's a start. But yeah, it'll be
Yeah,
something that I'll follow you on it anyway, because I find it really interesting, as I say, that aspect.
yeah.
So moving away from the owls, then let's talk about what projects are you up to with the Peregrine Fund at the moment, then, or you can talk about past ones as well that you're really proud of that you've done. But like you say, conservation, and it never just sort of ends, does it? Whatever project, it's a constant thing for years and years. And we've got Professor Carl Jones on Sunday,
Oh yeah.
um, and so obviously, he said to me on the phone the other day, he said what people don't realise, Jimmy, is these projects, they never end. Conservation will outlive, it will. The Mauritius Kestrel, for instance, obviously, which he's famous for, he was saying, that's going to go on forever. There's going to have to be some management in place for a long, long, long time, way out past him. So yeah, if any projects that you've got in the past or
Yeah.
current projects, the Parent Fund, what's going on at the moment in Africa for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I totally agree. A conservationist will never be out of work, but I think COVID-19 is going to call our ranks for sure because there's no funding right now.
Yeah,
Um, but, hopefully moving on, in some capacity next year, we'll see. Yeah, I've been working on a project we started a couple of years ago called the Coexistence Co-op.
okay,
Um, yeah, it's actually a collaboration between myself and Dr. Elaine Cotterill, who's based in the UK. Oh, well, she was actually based in Kenya for many, many years, is how I know her. but she also worked in the same area. I met her at Impala Research Center, and we both have worked in Laikipia, which is the county where Impala is sort of central. And Laikipia is sort of this unique area because it's a bunch of private conservancies mostly and
Yeah.
ranches, and has a lot of wildlife. So Elaine has her project, which is called Lion Landscape, or sorry, her NGO is called Lion Landscapes. And so we um, came together a couple years ago because I had been doing a lot of work with vultures and vulture poisoning issues. And in Kenya, at least, the most of the poisoning of vultures is pretty much related to predator poisoning. So as I kind of explained earlier, it's when a local person loses a cow, or sometimes a goat, but often it's many goats or many cows or a camel. They're actually fairly tolerant, particularly people we've been working with for a little bit. But it comes to a point where there's the Kenya Wildlife Service doesn't always respond very rapidly.
Yeah.
I mean, they are they have a lot of capacity issues themselves. So there's a real gap between the locals, what the livestock they're losing, and then, the wildlife service who's supposed to respond. And
Yeah.
so what often happens is, yeah, they may retaliate by putting poison on their remaining livestock carcass with the intention of, poisoning that lion, hyena, leopard, whatever it is. But as I said earlier, the main thing that gets poisoned almost, I think every single poisoning is vultures, and other raptors, usually tawny eagles, battlelores, some of our really iconic birds. So we lose, often. Like, we had a poisoning actually fairly recently where, lions were targeted, no lions were killed, but we lost, I think, was it 17 vultures, 11 tawny eagles,
Yeah.
and a jackal. That's the typical mortality at a
Yeah.
poisoning. So Elaine and I came together recognizing that, you're not gonna get very far in vulture conservation if you're not working with the predator people, who are really at the root cause of a lot of these issues. So yeah, we've been, what we do is, so the Peregrine Fund's sort of input into the project is, we had already, for at least a year before Elaine and I joined up, we had already been starting these trainings in the community. So I have a team. I don't do them myself. I have a team that does them in Swahili language, and they go out. And our first training was really, these are like day-long trainings, and they're focused. The first one was focused on poisoning. And it's actually amazing because when you start doing these, you realize there's so much demand from all levels of society, because basically what we're talking about is, so in the morning, the guys go out, and so my trainer will go and we'll set up a PowerPoint. We have a little, usually, place that we use, or we can do it other places. And so the morning is about learning a little bit about poisons, why people poison, basically, for community level people, it is about them understanding how dangerous these things are.
Yeah.
And basically, the animals they're targeting most of the time are usually not what's killed, but the whole environment gets contaminated. You get a huge loss of species. But, in the end, we've had cases where people who don't know there was a poisoning, that happened the previous day, go and graze their livestock, their cows in this particular case, where there was a poisoning in the previous day, and two cows were lost. So it's really, it's a human, it's a livestock issue, it's a wildlife issue, all these social things and economic issues. Poisoning just touches on
Yeah.
them all.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so the team goes out, and most of the morning is just kind of educating people about poisons, poison awareness, um, you know, what poisons people use sometimes. And part of it is really interactive because, we are the poison people, unfortunately. We are all in a little network. But we know a tiny fraction of what is being poisoned. There is, from everything from mice, excuse me, squirrels, um, guinea fowl for food, fish, all kinds of birds like cranes because they dig up seeds, doves. I mean, from top to bottom, from elephants down to mice, e- everything gets poisoned, and it's getting poisoned on a daily basis in most communities, a lot of times. So, I'm not saying elephants are poisoned on a daily basis, but there's poisoning going on in most communities on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So when you start doing these trainings, you're kind of like, whoa, because, a lot of people are coming at a really low, educational level where it's just really basic information that you and I might take for granted, about how dangerous these things are that people
Yeah.
just don't realize. So, we have a lot of interaction time with people. So, sorry, apart from, us telling them about poisons, we always try and engage them and say, okay, so what do you guys know, right? Because
Yeah.
everybody knows something.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's got an opinion. Yeah.
Everybody knows what goes on in the communities. There is nothing that is not known. People know. So as soon as you start engaging with these people and they become comfortable with you, they'll tell you all the stories. So, we collect all that data. Then in the afternoon, what we do is we set up what's like a mock poisoning scene.
Yeah.
So the guys might like we'll put out an empty poison container. We might put some footprints. We'll try and show people what a poisoning scene might look like. Okay,
Yeah.
we're not usually dead animals, but we might have a feather or something like that, so that people can understand what they might encounter in the field. Um, and so and then we teach them basically what they should do if they find this, who to call,
Yeah.
what they should do. Like, I'm sure Andre may have talked about some of this stuff because he's heavily involved. But you want to secure the scene so nothing else can come in and die. And then you need to clean up the scene if you're, mandated by KWS, the Kenya Wildlife Service and things like that. Depends on obviously what species are involved. A lot of times, in some communities, it's dogs. There's a lot of feral dogs and basically when they become a nuisance because they actually feed on a lot of crops. Nobody's feeding them, so they eat tomatoes, they eat maize, so they get poisoned on a pretty regular basis. So every community knows about poisoned dogs. And, until we started talking to them, a poisoned dog would just sit there until it rotted. But, you tie this in. This is why we no longer have black kites in a lot of these areas. We no longer see hooded vultures in these communities because
Yeah.
these things have been going on for decades. So, it's been a real eye opener, those trainings. And that was our initial focus. And we still do those. We do a lot, and we have a huge demand. My guys are really good, and we have done them at government level. We train Kenya Wildlife Service. We've trained the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. So we do all kinds of levels of trainings, and there's so much demand for them. But in addition, we decided, it's great to tell people about poisoning, but it doesn't really get to the root cause, which is, the predator conflict.
Yeah.
So we joined up with an organization that's also been working in Laikipia, which is called Living with Lions. And one of their employees named Steve Akwanga, he had developed some couple of decades earlier, a very low cost livestock corral, because what happens when the predators attack, oftentimes it's in what we call a boma. So
Yeah.
in Swahili, the boma is a livestock corral. So it's
Yeah.
just like a fenced enclosure. And traditionally, these were just like what they do is traditionally is they cut acacia branches, right? And because they're thorny, and they make them in a circular,
Yeah.
and they make some kind of quasi door, and then livestock go in at night. And that's the traditional boma. But of course, there's not a lot of trees in some areas now with human population growth. So basically, Steve's idea was just how can we get communities to be building bomas that are better protecting their livestock. So it's a simple matter of teaching people how to use chain link fencing. There's a few details that are not maybe obvious to people, but like things like hyenas, if you look at their structure, they're not jumpers like a leopard or a lion. They
Yeah.
go under. So you have to bury that chain link, a few bit like this much, underground, so they can't get under it. In the door is always the weak spot for letting predators in. So, we teach people. So we have our second training now is basically Steve and I have another guy now. We're doing livestock management trainings. Most of it is focused on building these bomas, better bomas, predator-proof bomas, we can call them. So the morning they talk about, some of the importance of predators and, how you can manage them better. I mean, we don't tell a lot of these pastoralists how to manage their livestock. They obviously know better than us, but there are a lot of people out there now that don't get that sort of, that real handed down training from father to son anymore. A lot of those links are broken. So you do get a lot of people who don't understand things like, well, maybe we shouldn't allow children to herd livestock because the predators aren't really scared of children as they are as adults. Things like that, and just like throwing away like kitchen waste, be it bones or whatever, right outside your door. Well, maybe go a little further so you're not attracting, particularly the hyenas, right to where your cows are, right? So simple things, but some people know, but a lot of people don't, or you need reinforcing. And then in the afternoon, part of that training is we bring the poles and the chain link fencing, and we have them in the door, and we have them build their own predator-proof boma right there. And so that has been really, really, really rewarding. We've had like over 350 built already.
Oh wow, brilliant!
In about a year and a half. So
fantastic.
Yeah, and we do it a little differently because there's a lot of groups that work with predators who are doing these kinds of bomas, working with lion groups or whatever, and a lot of them are subsidized by NGOs, but we don't do any of that. Ours is just capacity building of local people, because we want them to invest in these bomas for their life. You can hear the stories of how if you build something for someone, it's nice, but it doesn't mean they're going to invest in maintaining it. So we want them to come, learn the skills that they need. They go home, and we know enough about the economic situation of most of the people in these communities that they can afford what is roughly, between 50 to 60, maybe $70 US. The chain link and the materials to build these bomas themselves. That's selling usually one, maybe two goats. Done.
Cool.
So
I was just going to ask, going back to a question that cropped up in my head, just going back to the first bit you were talking about. What have you found when you're talking to the communities about the actual poisoning and the act of poisoning, and what do you find they're most receptive to in terms of, are they most worried about human health, so the fact that it could kill their children, or are they more receptive to the fact that it could kill the economic effect of it could kill their cattle at a later date, or are they still actually, like you say, once you give them a little bit of knowledge, they actually do think, well, I still actually care about the wildlife and what's going around. It isn't just about humans, and it isn't just about economics. what are they what do you find they're most receptive to when you start giving them the information?
Yeah, I think I'm not at all the community trainings, but I certainly know what happens. And I can say, and even from the ones I've been at, basically, overall, the thing that'll drive people to do and change their behavior is if it relates to money, economics, particularly for the income groups that we're dealing with, which are fairly low on the scale. People who can't meet their basic need. If there's not an economic incentive for them to change, they won't. You can tell them all the education you want. There may be something short term, they may remember that, but at the end of the day, if they're not putting food on the table,
Yeah.
that's a problem. So definitely the livestock, but there is definitely, my guys have told me, there's definitely a difference in the gender roles too. Most of the most keen people that we have, particularly with the poisoning training, that go home and sort of transmit that knowledge to a lot more people in the communities are definitely women. Most of the people that are very keen are the women, and I think that has to do with their role in bringing up children in the human health aspect. And often they're not as, I mean, they may be the sole household, head of household, but they might not be as, the only income earner. So, while that mostly falls to the men, it's pretty traditional still. So, the women, can have a different role in it, and they're always very keen compared to most of the men.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I read a paper the other day from South America, and I forget the species it was on about, but it was a hawk eagle, and it was related to conflict of eagles predating on chickens, and they looked at the role of the male and female in it, in the sense of whether you needed to specifically target your education and your work towards the individual sexes. And they found, the women, the gist I got from it, the women were quite important because they were at home and they were looking after the chickens. The men were out at work, so it was the women who had the worst opinion or view of hawk eagles in that sense, which I can't remember the species, sorry. And so it was women that they really had to put the most work into to educate them, because they saw it when the hawk eagle was killing the chicken outside the patch. And it's quite interesting to hear a similar thing there, that it's the different sexes.
That's definitely what we would say too. I mean, it's, my guys are like, they're so keen to do women's groups, or even we have, because we always target the training, so it's not just like anybody can come, because we feel like if you do that, the whole village might show up, especially now if people are not home, or home more, I mean. So I have a guy who's their community liaison, and basically he, we know the really high conflict areas, and so we get about 15 people from each village, and we try and pick some of the most influential people who will be like the village elders, the chiefs. But some of them are like organized in their own groups already. Like we have self-help groups, and we have quite a few women's groups and environmental groups. So my guys are always really keen, when there's a women's group, because they know that they switch on really, really well to what we're talking about, and the human health aspect of it really resonates particularly with the women.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So my other question was about the bomas, or the chain link bomas that you're making. So you're going into just so I can build up a picture. You're going into a village, and the community buy into like a cooperative, really, of this is our boma, and they share it. Is that essentially what's?
Mostly it's individuals.
Okay.
So we're training, like I said, about 15 people per village. So generally they'll go and do their own boma. I know of one village that, yeah, decided they'll do a community boma.
Yeah.
I actually need to follow up on that because I'm not quite sure how that's worked out. But I think there's still a lot of like semi-nomadic people, particularly if it's a drought year. So
Yeah.
sometimes the communities are really mobile and it doesn't always work to do, something community
Wow.
centric.
Yeah.
But majority of the people that we're working with are, yeah, they're doing their own bomas. But it's been great. I mean, part of it is conservation is not just, that's the selling point that we give on our proposals. But when you do this work and you kind of get into it, you realize there's so much more that you can't articulate, to people unless like this talking to you. You don't get a
Yeah.
chance to say how much more goes into these relationships. It's about, I mean, conservation is just about people. It's not about wildlife. And once you start working with people and building relationships, there's so many more dynamic levels that come out of these relationships that are really often more key to the work you're doing, protecting vultures in our case, than, actually maybe the poisoning, whatever. It's having these keen people who are not, I shouldn't say they're informants, but they are like our link to what's happening in the community. So when you invest a day of training 15 people, you have 15 people that are like, you can call them. We get everybody's names, everybody's phone numbers who come to our trainings, and we have a little army of people now, right, that we can call at any time. And when, like, particularly now, with COVID, this situation, it's overlapped with a lot of really heavy rains. Actually, they've started even earlier back in October, and we really didn't have our normal dry season in January and February. So now, we've had these 6, 7 months of almost continual rains. And what happens in the rainy season is obviously the grass grows taller and the lions tend to become a lot more problem for the communities. um, Part of it is that their prey, their natural prey, moves a lot more. So we have zebras that go into communities, and the lions follow and get into trouble. But then the grass is taller, so the lions can hunt, more easily in the daytime because they're not being seen as well.
Yeah.
So they also get into problems more with livestock, when the grass is tall. So
And I
we've
suppose
had, sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just going to ask, does that sort of information, just quickly, I was going to ask, that sort of information is coming from you working with Lion Landscapes, is that right? So they're,
Yeah, just the lion, the lion people, as we call them, because a lot of us with raptors, a lot of the movements, a lot of the populations of raptors, they're all still, a lot of them, tied to predators, right? Um, they can't be, I mean, when I say predators, I mean the big mammal predators, right?
yeah,
So, they, especially for most of our birds of prey, even if they're not traditional scavengers, um, they still scavenge when they're hungry. So
yeah,
you can also, I'm sure we've talked about doing this kind of study, but I don't think we ever have. I'm sure somebody has done it, is where you look at, how much birds of prey move, where you actually still have good, lion, hyena populations, because they work together, it's
yeah,
part of the ecosystem
yeah,
for them.
yeah,
So yeah, the lion stuff, yeah, some of it's come from, Lion Landscapes. But of course, working on poisoning is also a real link to all the lion people. So you do kind of, over the years, I, I've started it. Well, I actually work with Andre on a database. I don't know if he mentioned it. It's called the African Wildlife Poisoning Database.
okay, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, and we had a Kenya version that was started back in 2008 by somebody else, but I sort of took it over. And then Andre has been leading in the Southern Africa region. So I try and collate all database records, well, particularly from Kenya, but then we have, some obvious, people that we work with in other countries. So I do all of like this northern part in West Africa. Andre does all the southern part mostly. And then we have this online database now where anybody can, request to get records, depending on what they want to use it for.
Yeah.
And it's been a real, obviously you can't affect change, and you can't change, particularly, people's behavior, but even governments, linked to all wildlife poisoning. There's a lot of policy issues in these things, right?
Yeah.
And you can't do that. The first thing someone says to you is, okay, show us the data, right? So we started a whole campaign against Furidan in particular in 2008, a whole bunch of us. And, that's what they said, show us the data. And then, they'll sit there and dispute it. And so that's where the database came from. It's like, okay, here's
Yeah.
the data,
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that, back up the argument. Yeah, absolutely. But so what? Obviously, you're busy with that. I'm conscious of time. I don't want to keep you all day. I know. Well, I've not got a lot on today, but anyway, other people have got lives. What else have you got? Anything else in the pipeline or the future? I know. I mean, it's probably a silly question to ask, really, because yeah, we know from talking to Andre about vultures that it's such a dire problem out there at the moment, and there's so much work that's needing to go into it. I feel a bit silly maybe asking if there's any other projects you've got going at the moment or any other ideas. But
yeah, we do. I mean, I have a lot of other vulture, actually more hands-on stuff with vultures that I do as part of the community work we do.
Yeah.
I mean, we still trap and tag vultures. I don't have a lot that are moving around, but we still have a lot of, vultures movement studies that we do, and we monitor a lot of the vulture cliffs in Kenya, which is mostly for Rupel's vulture. And what else do we do? Well, I actually have quite a few students too. So one of them is working with the vultures, looking at movement patterns in relation to poisoning cases. I have another, well, he's not a student at the moment, but he's working on a project on secretary birds.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, and he's just starting. He just got some funding to do that. I think maybe what might be more of interest to people too is that we're, and all this downtime is giving us, I'm sure you've heard this from others, people are writing a lot and going through all our data that we have.
Yeah.
So actually for even well before COVID struck, we've been working on looking to do the analysis of road survey data for raptors that we've been, we had started back in 2010. So we were doing annual surveys for like over 5 days. We had 2 teams that went. My team went up in sort of northern Kenya, like Kibia Samburu area, and then there was a southern team that went down in Savo and Amboseli National Park areas. So basically what we're doing is compiling all that data with some historical data from Kenya, and we are, obviously looking at population trends, which I'm sure you can imagine they mostly just go in one direction. Some pretty steep declines in, a number of species. Of course, we already know about vultures, but this will look at, a lot of raptors, but obviously not the forest species, and owls are not included. But that is something we hope to publish, in the next few months. And then somewhat linked to that is going to be another publication that is going to look at basically there's been 3 studies that have on raptor road surveys that have been done in Africa. So there's going to be this Kenya one that we're going to publish. There was one in Botswana a couple of years ago that Becky Garbett headed, and then Jean-Marc Fialet has done those long transects in West Africa. And so we're going to combine all those areas and basically show for most species, it'll be a global assessment of their population trends over about 40 years. And that's really going to show a lot.
I'm assuming, or would I be right in assuming a lot of this is if someone watching this wants to go on and read and find out a bit more, is this all on the Peregrine Fund website? I didn't check. I should have checked.
No.
All right.
Peregrine Fund just redid their website. I don't even know what's on it.
Okay.
Not that much yet. I think it's still a work in progress.
Okay.
But no, I think a lot of it actually, if you probably where I post mostly is we have a Facebook page. It's called the Coexistence Co-op. So at Coexistence Co-op, and if you get onto that and you follow us there, I generally post. I do most of the posting, so it's not very lion focused. It's mostly birds of prey focused.
Well, that's all I'm interested in anyway. No, I'm joking. I do like lions, but yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, what I'll do is I'll try and tag that. I'll try and add it in. I'm pretty sure I follow that on Facebook. I'm pretty good at picking up on things like that. So I'll try and tag it into the comments of this video on Facebook, so people can hopefully get a direct link to it. What if I'm, as I say, I just keep looking at the time, so I'm conscious we're on 60 minutes or pretty much on the hour. Just to finish off then. What do I'm trying to remember. I said about that bad question that I asked Andre, and I'm trying not to ask it, but I like to finish on not a high note, but sort of what are you most. I asked Alex the other day, yes, on Tuesday, what he was most proud of, but yeah, I suppose because you've been involved in so much in Kenya now. What are you most proud of, or what do you see is going to be the big thing that you want to get involved in next? It's a big question. Sorry, I'm bad at these.
Yeah, I'll try not to chat too long because I'm
only conscious. I'm always conscious of time because I can talk the back leg off a donkey, you see, about birds of prey, and I don't want to keep Darcy. I don't want to keep you here for too long. But yeah, so we'll. Yeah,
I would have to say I'm very proud of the work we've done in highlighting the African vulture crisis. Basically, I mean, I think that all started looking around, and I was writing a bunch of blogs and on National Geographic, and they were getting posted on their Facebook page, which was pretty amazing because of the reach they had. And then that just snowballed, and then basically getting the vultures on on the page, basically in the spotlight. And it's amazing how that has really taken off. I mean, in Africa, obviously birds are not high on people's list compared to rhinos, apes, elephants, all that.
Yeah.
So we do fly under the radar, pun intended. And so it's been great to see particularly U.S. zoos get involved and start to fund some of us to do a lot of this work. So I'm really proud of how much that has taken off, and particularly how it is, these are things you don't realize until afterwards, right? In retrospect, you can say, people always say, well, okay, what's a paper, right? Who cares? That's for science nerds. But honestly, I can tell from that process of writing the paper that we did in 2005, but published in 2006 about the vulture decline in Africa, the impact of that was beyond imagination. We never thought it would get this far. And what I learned is that it actually, the science will always be there, but understanding that is a crucial part of the process, because particularly when you're dealing with funding that traditionally, I would say at least 90% of all funding in Africa goes to the big guys, right? Not any birds. So when you're dealing with that scenario, it's like, well, how do you get on the radar of these funders? And you have to do those kind of papers because they bring so much attention. So that I'm really proud of how that's gone, and also how much that has spurred local, people, well, I shouldn't just say local people, but Africans from all different countries to get involved and to really understand what's going on with vultures, and by extension, and I hope with this other paper I was talking about, it'll be birds of prey in general, because we have got so many now Africans in West Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia. We have so many people now who are picking up on vultures in particular, wanting to do studies on them, looking for funding. So this is the key for how these birds are going to be,
Saved, yeah.
served for the long term. It's not going to be people like me, of course. So I'm very proud to see that hopefully there'll be a legacy of, the work in terms of, having local African people just being involved in
Yeah.
wanting to conserve birds of prey.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, that's a pretty good note to finish on, I think. Right, Darcy,
Yeah.
it's been amazing. Thank you very much for taking time to chat to us all. I will I'll hit start. And then
Great.
yeah, well,
Thank you.
thank you very much.